What if some of old Hollywood's most famous figures were not completely natural accidents of glamour, but carefully built studio creations? Costumes, camera angles, publicity photos, and headline-making gowns could turn an actress into a national obsession almost overnight. Some stars fought that image. Others brilliantly controlled it. Today, we're ranking 45 old Hollywood actresses whose curvaceous screen image became almost as famous as their movies. If classic Hollywood stories are your thing, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Number 1. Marilyn Monroe. Few movie stars were packaged as carefully, or became more powerful than the package itself. Marilyn Monroe entered Hollywood when studios still knew exactly how to manufacture an image, but what made her different was the strange mixture of glamour, comedy, vulnerability, and self-awareness she brought to it. Films such as Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, and The 7-Year Itch turned wardrobe into storytelling. The famous white dress sequence above the subway grate became one of cinema's most recognizable photographs, even for people who have never watched the entire film. Meanwhile, Some Like It Hot showed that Monroe could make an exaggerated glamorous persona genuinely funny, rather than simply decorative. Behind that carefully photographed silhouette was an actress who increasingly wanted serious roles and greater control. She eventually formed Marilyn Monroe Productions, an unusually bold move for a female star of her era. Her image has been copied thousands of times, yet copies rarely capture what made the original work. Monroe was not merely photographed beautifully. She understood exactly what the camera expected from Marilyn Monroe, and then gave it something slightly more complicated. Biography has described her as one of Hollywood's defining screen symbols, while Gentlemen Prefer Blondes remains central to that image. Number 2. Sophia Loren. Long before beauty campaigns could become worldwide overnight, Sophia Loren created the kind of screen presence that seemed capable of crossing every border without translation. Hollywood audiences discovered something noticeably different from the carefully polished American studio ideal. Loren looked glamorous, certainly, but her appeal was mixed with confidence, humor, intelligence, and an unmistakably Mediterranean style. Rather than appearing fragile, she often seemed powerful enough to dominate the men sharing her scenes. Pictures including Houseboat, The Pride and the Passion, and It Started in Naples helped make her internationally famous, while her acclaimed dramatic work proved that concentrating only on her appearance badly underestimated her talent. One of the most important things about Loren's image was movement. Designers could create spectacular gowns, but she did not resemble a mannequin wearing them. She walked into scenes with confidence, used expressions aggressively, and could switch from elegant to comic within seconds. That difference helped her survive beyond the period when many actresses marketed mainly through glamour photographs disappeared from major roles. Hollywood may have promoted Sophia Loren as an extraordinary beauty, but audiences gradually understood that the glamour worked because there was a formidable actress controlling it. Before we continue, subscribe if you enjoy discovering the real stories behind Hollywood's most unforgettable stars. We have 43 more screen legends ahead, and several surprising names are coming. Number 3. Jane Mansfield. Nobody understood publicity quite like Jane Mansfield. During the 1950s, she became one of Hollywood's most visible blonde stars, but treating her merely as a Monroe imitation misses what made Mansfield unusual. She exaggerated the entire bombshell idea until it almost became performance art. Bright gowns, carefully planned entrances, outrageous photographs, and publicity appearances kept her name constantly circulating. Hollywood publicity made her glamorous figure part of the story before audiences had even decided what they thought of her acting. The Girl Can't Help It provided the perfect showcase. Rather than hiding the joke, director Frank Tashlin built comedy around the exaggerated reactions Mansfield's character produced wherever she went. In Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, she pushed the persona even further. Yet Mansfield was more complicated than the cartoons inspired by her image. She studied, played musical instruments, performed on stage, and understood how newspapers operated. Her official biography chronicles how determined she was to become famous from a young age, while later accounts continue to identify her as one of the defining Hollywood glamour figures of the 1950s. What made Mansfield memorable was not simply appearance. She knew Hollywood rewarded spectacle, so she made herself impossible to ignore. Number 4. Jane Russell. Before audiences had properly seen Jane Russell acting, many already knew exactly how Howard Hughes wanted them to see her. The advertising campaign surrounding the outlaw became almost as famous as the movie. Publicity photographs emphasized Russell's striking figure so heavily that controversy became free advertising. Biography notes that this campaign helped establish her as a star before the film received its wide release. Yet anyone who watches Russell beside Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes quickly discovers why her career lasted beyond one sensational campaign. Russell had a wonderfully dry delivery. While Monroe played innocence and nervous excitement, Russell's Dorothy Shaw looked as though she understood every ridiculous thing happening around her. That contrast made their partnership irresistible. Russell also brought toughness to westerns and crime pictures. There was something grounded about her that prevented even extremely glamorous costumes from making her look delicate. Years later, she could joke openly about the image Hollywood had built around her. That self-awareness is important. Russell's fame demonstrates how aggressively the studio era could focus attention on a woman's silhouette, yet her personality repeatedly escaped the stereotype. The publicity may have introduced Jane Russell, but her humor and confidence made audiences keep watching. Number 5. Raquel Welch. One costume can sometimes change an entire career, and Raquel Welch experienced perhaps the ultimate example. When promotional photographs from 1,000,000 years BC began circulating, the movie itself almost became secondary. Welch's prehistoric costume produced an enormously popular poster and established her internationally as one of cinema's major glamour figures. Her own official biography identifies the film as central to her rise after Fantastic Voyage. But Welch spent much of the rest of her career pushing against the limitations created by that image. She played action heroines, Western characters, comedic parts, and adventurous women who were frequently more assertive than the conventional decorative roles offered to glamorous actresses. The Three Musketeers eventually earned her a Golden Globe and gave audiences another reminder that she could handle comedy. Welch also appeared during an interesting transition. The old studio system was fading, social attitudes were changing, and the carefully controlled 1950s glamour machine no longer operated in quite the same way. Yet one poster managed to create an old-fashioned level of movie star mythology. That is why Welch belongs near the top. Hollywood promoted countless attractive actresses. Very few could be reduced to one image, and then spend decades proving there was considerably more behind it. Number 6. Elizabeth Taylor. By the time Elizabeth Taylor became an adult star, audiences had already watched her grow up on film. That made her transformation into one of Hollywood's supreme glamour figures particularly fascinating. Taylor never depended on a single publicity gimmick. Her image grew through spectacular costumes, close-ups that emphasized her famously distinctive eyes, high-profile romances, jewelry, and increasingly mature performances. A Place in the Sun showed her photographed with almost dreamlike elegance. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof brought a very different energy, with Taylor playing Maggie as frustrated, determined, glamorous, and emotionally dangerous. Then Cleopatra took everything associated with Elizabeth Taylor and enlarged it to monumental scale. The costumes became events themselves. Yet Taylor repeatedly demonstrated that beauty was not the reason she remained important. Her performances, in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Butterfield 8, earned Academy Awards, and she became one of the rare studio-era stars whose personal fame seemed almost larger than Hollywood. Contemporary biography still describes her as one of the last great stars formed by the traditional Hollywood studio system. Her glamour attracted attention, but sheer force of personality turned Elizabeth Taylor into something more enduring, a celebrity who appeared completely incapable of becoming ordinary. Number 7. Ava Gardner. Something dangerous seemed to happen whenever Ava Gardner entered the frame. She did not possess the bubbly sweetness associated with some Hollywood glamour stars. Her screen image was darker, more independent, and slightly unpredictable. Audiences could believe that characters might ruin their lives simply because Gardner had walked into the room. That atmosphere became crucial to The Killers, where Kitty Collins operates at the center of a noir nightmare. Gardner's beauty is obvious, but the performance works because viewers sense calculation underneath the elegance. Then came movies such as Mogambo, The Barefoot Contessa, and The Night of the Iguana, each using different parts of her persona. Costume designers frequently emphasized a classic hourglass silhouette, but Gardner's expressions could completely change the effect. She might appear bored, amused, angry, or mysteriously distant, while everyone else in the scene remained fascinated. Off-screen stories involving Frank Sinatra, international travel, parties, and rebellious behavior only strengthened her mythology. Yet Gardner sometimes appeared uncomfortable with celebrity itself. That tension made her more intriguing. Hollywood wanted audiences to see an impossible fantasy. Gardner's performances often suggested that the woman inside that fantasy might be perfectly capable of walking away. Very few screen stars made glamour look simultaneously inviting and dangerous. Number 8. Rita Hayworth. Hollywood did not simply discover Rita Hayworth. Hollywood redesigned Rita Hayworth. Born Margarita Cancino, she changed her name and appearance as her career developed, becoming one of Columbia Pictures' greatest stars. The transformation reveals how deliberately the studio system constructed its icons. Then came Gilda. Few entrances explain screen mythology better. Hayworth flips back her hair, looks toward Glenn Ford, and instantly changes the temperature of the movie. Her famous performance of "Put the Blame on Mame," combined with Jean-Louis's black satin gown, created an image that became inseparable from 1940s glamour. Yet the movie also demonstrates the problem with that image. Gilda is constantly judged, desired, suspected, and controlled by the men around her. Hayworth famously suggested that men became fascinated with Gilda and were disappointed when they encountered Rita herself. That gap between public fantasy and private person followed her throughout her career. Musicals with Fred Astaire showed another side. She was an elegant dancer with considerable technical ability, something sometimes forgotten when discussions concentrate on photographs. At her peak, Hayworth was not simply glamorous. She represented the extraordinary power Hollywood possessed to turn lighting, costume, movement, and personality into a fantasy millions of viewers believed they knew personally. Number 9. Gina Lollobrigida. American audiences sometimes acted as though Hollywood invented glamour. Gina Lollobrigida was evidence that Europe had other ideas. Arriving during the post-war fascination with Italian cinema, she offered a style that felt more earthy and energetic than the restrained elegance associated with many American stars. Her screen image blended fashionable sophistication with warmth and humor. In pictures such as Beat the Devil, Trapeze, and Come September, the camera clearly understood her visual appeal, but Lollobrigida rarely behaved as though her character existed merely to decorate the scene. That confidence became central to the international Italian bombshell image of the 1950s. Beautifully fitted dresses and dramatic evening gowns strengthened the silhouette audiences associated with her, while photographers turned her into a global magazine favorite. The interesting part came later. Lollobrigida developed serious interests beyond acting, including photography and sculpture, gradually demonstrating how restrictive the beautiful actress label could be. Hollywood's publicity culture frequently flattened women into easily marketable types: blonde bombshell, exotic beauty, girl next door, icy blonde. Lollobrigida was marketed through similar shorthand, yet her personality remained stubbornly individual. She became famous partly because of appearance, but she remained memorable because she possessed the confidence of someone who knew the camera was following her. Number 10. Anita Ekberg. One fountain scene transformed Anita Ekberg into cinematic mythology. Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita contains many unforgettable sequences, yet the image most people remember is Ekberg entering Rome's Trevi Fountain in a dramatic black evening dress, while Marcello Mastroianni follows her. The scene is romantic, strange, excessive, and completely unreal, which is exactly why it works. Ekberg had already been promoted as a glamorous international personality before Fellini used that public image so effectively. Hollywood appearances in pictures such as Artists and Models and Hollywood or Bust introduced her to American audiences, while magazine photographs helped create the familiar Swedish bombshell label. What Fellini accomplished was more interesting. Rather than pretending the persona was natural, La Dolce Vita turns Ekberg's character Sylvia into a living celebrity fantasy. Crowds chase her, photographers surround her, and men project ideas onto her. The fountain sequence then makes the fantasy almost dreamlike. Ekberg therefore occupies an unusual place on this list. Her most famous screen moment is not simply an example of classic glamour. It is practically a commentary on the machinery that produces glamour. One black dress, one Roman fountain, and one perfectly photographed movie sequence were enough to make her immortal. Number 11. Lana Turner. Sometimes Hollywood mythology begins with a story almost too perfect to believe. For Lana Turner, that story involved being noticed as a teenager and rapidly transformed into a movie star. Whatever later embellishments entered the legend, her rise demonstrated how quickly the studio system could manufacture fascination around a fresh face. Early publicity emphasized youth and glamour, particularly after They Won't Forget. Before long, Turner became one of MGM's major attractions. By the 1940s, sophisticated gowns and carefully sculpted hairstyles had replaced much of the youthful image. Pictures including Ziegfeld Girl, The Postman Always Rings Twice, and later, The Bad and the Beautiful, showed how adaptable her screen presence could be. The Postman Always Rings Twice remains especially revealing. Her white wardrobe makes Cora immediately noticeable against the darker surroundings, producing an almost impossibly polished figure inside a grim crime story. Yet the character's ambition and frustration prevent the appearance from becoming merely decorative. Turner's personal life eventually became enormous tabloid material, especially after the death of Johnny Stompanato in her home and the subsequent investigation involving her daughter Cheryl Crane. That scandal might have destroyed a smaller celebrity. Turner's mythology absorbed it. Her glamorous public image remained powerful, because it belonged to an era when movie stars were expected to look larger than life even when their private lives became painfully complicated. Number 12. Jean Harlow. Before Monroe, Mansfield, or countless later imitators, Jean Harlow helped establish the Hollywood blonde bombshell formula. Her rise during the early 1930s was shockingly fast. Platinum hair, glamorous gowns, and an irreverent personality made her look distinctly modern compared with many stars around her. Platinum blonde practically turned her appearance into a brand name. Yet Harlow's strongest movies reveal something frequently overlooked. She could be extremely funny. In Dinner at 8, Red Dust, Libeled Lady, and Bombshell, she demonstrates comic timing that prevents the glamorous image from overwhelming the character. Bombshell is particularly fascinating because it makes fun of Hollywood publicity, while Harlow herself was one of the industry's most heavily publicized actresses. Her character deals with studio manipulation, intrusive reporters, romance problems, and relentless demands on her public identity. In other words, the movie allowed audiences to laugh at the very machine creating Jean Harlow. Her death in 1937, at only 26, turned an already enormous star into a permanent legend. Unlike later glamour icons, who could spend decades renegotiating their image, Harlow never reached that stage. She remained frozen in the public imagination, as young, rebellious, glamorous, and unmistakably connected to pre-war Hollywood. Nearly every blonde bombshell who followed inherited at least part of the visual language Harlow helped establish. Number 13. Betty Grable. During the Second World War, one photograph of Betty Grable became something much bigger than studio advertising. Her famous pin-up pose, photographed from behind as she looked over her shoulder, reportedly became one of the era's most widely circulated celebrity images among American servicemen. It captured exactly what 20th Century Fox had perfected with Grable: cheerful glamour that felt bright rather than threatening. Her movies followed the same formula. Colorful musicals, elaborate costumes, romantic misunderstandings, and energetic production numbers turned her into one of the studio's most bankable attractions. Pictures such as Down Argentine Way, Moon Over Miami, and Pin Up Girl rarely demanded bleak psychological realism. They offered escape. That was precisely the point. Unlike film noir figures such as Ava Gardner, Grable's image was approachable. She was glamorous enough to represent fantasy, but cheerful enough to feel familiar. Her famous legs became such an important part of the publicity machine that they were reportedly insured, another classic example of Hollywood turning a physical feature into a headline. Yet reducing Grable to publicity photographs ignores how difficult musical stardom actually was. She danced, sang, handled comedy, carried large productions, and maintained an enormously popular screen persona across years of changing fashions. For wartime audiences, Betty Grable represented Hollywood fantasy with a smile, and few stars sold that fantasy more successfully. Number 14. Hedy Lamarr. At first glance, Hollywood knew exactly what it wanted from Hedy Lamarr. Extraordinary beauty photographed in perfect light. The problem was that Lamarr's life consistently refused to remain inside that narrow description. After arriving in Hollywood from Europe, she became associated with sophisticated, exotic glamour in movies such as Algiers, Boomtown, Ziegfeld Girl, and Samson and Delilah. Her dark hair, symmetrical features, and elegant wardrobe created an image so influential that elements of her appearance were copied by other women. But behind the movie star persona was a restless inventor. During the Second World War, Lamar worked with composer George Antheil on a frequency-hopping communication concept intended to make radio-controlled torpedoes more resistant to interference. The idea later became an important part of the broader history of wireless technology. That revelation dramatically changed how later generations discussed her. It also exposes something uncomfortable about studio-era Hollywood. Executives could look at a woman capable of serious technical imagination and still conclude that the most useful thing about her was her face. Lamar understood the contradiction. Her legacy now exists on two levels: one of classical Hollywood's most famously glamorous performers, and an inventive mind who proved how inadequate the industry's stereotypes could be. That combination makes her far more fascinating than any publicity photograph. Number 15. Dorothy Dandridge. Breaking barriers in Hollywood could be especially cruel when the industry wanted an actress's glamour but remained unwilling to provide equal opportunities. Dorothy Dandridge experienced that contradiction throughout her career. She possessed elegance, musical ability, screen presence, and the kind of star-quality studios normally try desperately to manufacture. Yet racial discrimination sharply limited the roles available to her. Carmen Jones finally provided the showcase she deserved. Playing Carmen, Dandridge combined confidence and vulnerability in a performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, making her the first black woman nominated in that category. The film also allowed costume, color, and movement to create a glamorous leading lady image rarely granted to black actresses in mainstream Hollywood productions of the period. Dandridge followed it with films including Island in the Sun and Porgy and Bess, but the quantity and quality of opportunities never matched the attention surrounding her. That is what makes her story both inspiring and frustrating. Hollywood clearly recognized her beauty. Photographers recognized it. Audiences recognized it. Yet institutional barriers repeatedly prevented Dandridge from receiving the range of substantial roles routinely offered to white stars. Today, her influence reaches far beyond the glamorous photographs. She represents someone who looked completely at home among Hollywood royalty, even while the industry itself kept reminding her that its doors were not equally open. Number 16. Yvonne De Carlo. Before television audiences knew her as Lily Munster, Yvonne De Carlo had already spent years playing some of Hollywood's most striking adventure heroines. Universal understood her visual appeal and frequently placed her in elaborate costumes, exotic settings, westerns, and historical adventures. Pictures such as Salome, Where She Danced established the formula early. Color photography, dramatic wardrobes, and romantic adventure helped create De Carlo's glamorous persona during the 1940s. She later appeared opposite major stars in Criss Cross, revealing a harder dramatic edge within a film noir setting. Then Cecil B. DeMille cast her as Sephora in The Ten Commandments. That epic gave De Carlo a prestigious production far removed from some of the colorful escapist pictures that had established her fame. Ironically, an entirely different generation eventually discovered her through the Munsters. Heavy television makeup, comic dialogue, and gothic costumes transformed the former glamour star into one of television's most beloved supernatural mothers. That second career says something important about De Carlo. A glamorous image might open Hollywood's door, but adaptability keeps performers working after the industry's preferred look changes. She moved from pin-up photographs and technicolor adventures to biblical spectacle and situation comedy, without losing her distinctive screen presence. Hollywood initially sold Yvonne De Carlo as an exotic beauty. Audiences eventually remembered a much more versatile entertainer. Number 17. Esther Williams. Most glamour stars entered scenes through doors. Esther Williams frequently entered by diving into a swimming pool. MGM built elaborate productions around Williams's athletic ability after her competitive swimming ambitions were interrupted by the cancellation of the 1940 Olympics. Hollywood transformed that disappointment into an entirely new genre of spectacle, the aquatic musical. Pictures such as Bathing Beauty, Neptune's Daughter, and Million Dollar Mermaid surrounded Williams with gigantic pools, synchronized swimmers, fountains, extravagant costumes, and complicated underwater photography. Her athletic figure naturally became part of the marketing, but those sequences demanded far more than simply looking glamorous beside a pool. Williams performed difficult movements repeatedly under studio lighting while wearing costumes designed more for visual impact than competitive swimming. Injuries occurred, and the seemingly effortless fantasy required considerable physical discipline. That contradiction is what makes her place in Hollywood history so unusual. Her screen image was bright, healthy, colorful, and almost impossibly polished. Behind it was an athlete performing technically challenging work. Williams later spoke openly about the realities behind MGM's spectacle, helping audiences understand how demanding those productions could become. Many old Hollywood stars were famous for gowns. Esther Williams became famous for making water itself look like a costume department, and nobody else ever completely replaced her. Number 18. Sid Charisse. When Sid Charisse began dancing, dialogue suddenly seemed unnecessary. Her extraordinary control of movement made her one of MGM's most distinctive musical performers, particularly during the 1950s. Unlike the bubbly energy associated with some musical stars, Charisse frequently projected mystery and sophistication. That quality reaches its peak during the Broadway melody sequence in Singin' in the Rain. Wearing a striking green dress and working opposite Gene Kelly, she enters without needing an elaborate introduction. Her posture, movement, and expression immediately tell the audience what kind of character she represents. The Bandwagon offered another celebrated partnership, especially the Dancing in the Dark sequence with Fred Astaire. There, glamour becomes understated rather than provocative. Two performers walking through Central Park gradually turn an ordinary evening into choreography. Studio publicity naturally concentrated heavily on Charisse's famously long dancer's legs, but that focus risks missing the real achievement. Her body was her instrument, in the same way a pianist's hands were essential to performance. Every movement depended on training, timing, balance, and an ability to communicate without dialogue. That is why Charisse's most glamorous sequences still feel elegant rather than merely posed. Hollywood could manufacture photographs. What it could not manufacture was the precision that happened once Sid Charisse started moving. Number 19. Maureen O'Hara. Fiery red hair became Maureen O'Hara's visual trademark, especially once Technicolor revealed exactly what black and white photography had been hiding. But color alone did not explain her screen authority. O'Hara brought unusual physical confidence to adventure pictures and westerns. She could look completely believable standing beside performers such as John Wayne without disappearing into the conventional supportive wife role. Their partnership became especially memorable in The Quiet Man. The picture photographs Ireland, almost like a romantic dream, and O'Hara's Mary-Kate Danaher fits perfectly inside that heightened visual world. Her costumes emphasize traditional femininity, but the character herself has fierce pride and refuses to become passive. That mixture defined much of O'Hara's appeal. She could appear extremely glamorous while conveying the impression that anyone treating her character foolishly was about to regret it. Films including How Green Was My Valley, Miracle on 34th Street, and The Black Swan demonstrated impressive range across drama, family cinema, and adventure. Hollywood often marketed red-haired actresses as temperamental or exotic. O'Hara used that stereotype without allowing it to control her. The result was a screen image that felt romantic, without being fragile. Many glamorous stars were photographed as though audiences should rescue them. Maureen O'Hara frequently looked perfectly capable of rescuing herself. Number 20. Kim Novak. Few Hollywood star-making stories demonstrate studio control more clearly than Kim Novak's rise at Columbia Pictures. During the 1950s, the studio needed a major female star, and Novak was carefully groomed for that position. Her blonde hair, carefully selected wardrobe, makeup, publicity photographs, and mysterious persona created a cool kind of glamour, noticeably different from Marilyn Monroe's playful warmth. Then Alfred Hitchcock complicated everything with Vertigo. Novak plays both Madeline and Judy, characters whose appearances become central to the film's disturbing examination of obsession. James Stewart's Scotty does not simply fall in love. He attempts to reconstruct a woman according to an image stored in his memory, controlling hair, clothing, and eventually even color. That makes Novak's glamour essential to the story, rather than decorative. The famous transformation scene, surrounded by eerie green light, remains one of cinema's most unsettling examples of male fantasy, literally reshaping a woman's appearance. Outside Vertigo, pictures such as Picnic, Pal Joey, and Belle, Book and Candle used Novak's screen beauty more conventionally. Yet Hitchcock's film permanently changed how audiences could interpret it. Hollywood manufactured Kim Novak's star image. Vertigo asked what happens when the desire to manufacture an ideal woman becomes an obsession. Few glamorous stars received a movie that examined their own image so ruthlessly. Number 21. Mamie Van Doren. If Marilyn Monroe represented vulnerability and Jane Mansfield represented spectacle, Mamie Van Doren often represented rebellion. Her platinum blonde image clearly belonged to the same 1950s bombshell tradition, but Van Doren's screen persona frequently carried a harder rock and roll attitude. Movies such as Untamed Youth, Teacher's Pet, and College Confidential connected her with the decade's fascination and fear surrounding teenage culture, music, and changing social behavior. Tight costumes and provocative publicity photographs were unquestionably part of the marketing. But Van Doren approached the image with enough confidence that she often appeared to be participating in the joke rather than simply serving as its target. That became increasingly important as Hollywood changed. The carefully controlled studio system that had created earlier glamour queens began weakening, while television, independent filmmaking, and youth culture reshaped entertainment. Van Doren seemed unusually suited to that transition because her persona was already slightly rebellious. Unlike Monroe and Mansfield, she also lived long enough to discuss the bombshell era from considerable historical distance, reflecting on fame and the labels applied to women during the period. Her career demonstrates that the 1950s blonde phenomenon was never one single formula. Different actresses brought completely different personalities to similar publicity packaging. Mamie Van Doren's version came with a raised eyebrow, loud music, and the impression that she was enjoying the commotion. Number 22. Linda Darnell. Hollywood noticed Linda Darnell when she was extraordinarily young, and within a short period she was being presented as a sophisticated leading lady. That rapid transformation reflected both the power and danger of the studio system. 20th Century Fox promoted her dark-haired beauty heavily, casting her opposite major leading men in romantic dramas and historical pictures. Yet Darnell eventually became far more interesting when directors allowed darker qualities into her performances. Forever Amber provided lavish period spectacle, with elaborate costumes reinforcing her glamorous image. But A Letter to Three Wives gave her sharper material. As Laura May Hollingsway, Darnell plays a working-class woman whose marriage inspires suspicion about her motives. The role allows glamour, insecurity, social ambition, wit, and resentment to exist simultaneously. Then came No Way Out, where she participated in a much harsher drama dealing with racism and social conflict. Darnell's career therefore illustrates a familiar pattern. Studios discovered a beautiful young performer, emphasized appearance, and only gradually allowed audiences to see how much more she could do. Her private struggles and early death in a house fire at 41 added a tragic ending to the story. Today, the publicity portraits remain stunning, but the films reveal something more valuable: an actress who became increasingly compelling whenever the glamorous surface was allowed to crack. Number 23. Gene Tierney. There is something almost unreal about Gene Tierney's face in Laura. Otto Preminger understood that quality and built an entire mystery around it. For much of the film, Detective Mark McPherson becomes fascinated by Laura Hunt, while staring at her portrait and listening to other people describe her. Before the character fully becomes a living person, she exists as an image. Tierney's beauty therefore becomes part of the plot. The film asks whether anyone actually knows Laura or simply knows the version they have constructed in their imagination. That tension followed Tierney through several of her greatest performances. In Leave Her to Heaven, Technicolor beauty becomes deeply unsettling. Her character Ellen appears almost impossibly elegant, while gradually revealing jealousy and emotional instability. The famous lake sequence is especially chilling because Tierney remains visually composed while something terrible unfolds before her. That contrast gave her glamour and unusual dramatic usefulness. She could look serene while making audiences deeply uncomfortable. Movies including Heaven Can Wait, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, and The Razor's Edge offered softer variations on her screen presence. Tierney's personal life later included serious struggles away from Hollywood, making the perfection of those studio portraits feel even more artificial in retrospect. Her career reminds us that Hollywood glamour frequently created flawless images around people whose actual lives were anything but flawless. Number 24. Veronica Lake. Sometimes an entire celebrity identity can be built around a few inches of hair. Veronica Lake's famous peekaboo hairstyle became one of the most copied looks of the early 1940s. Blonde hair falling across one eye created an instant visual signature that photographers, costume designers, and movie posters could exploit. But Lake's real magic appeared beside Alan Ladd. Their films together, particularly This Gun for Hire, The Glass Key, and The Blue Dahlia, helped establish a distinctive film noir chemistry. Lake was relatively petite, which makes her inclusion here interesting. She proves that Hollywood's idea of a glamorous or sensual silhouette was never dependent on one specific body type. What mattered was presentation. A low voice, mysterious expression, carefully fitted clothing, and that unforgettable hairstyle produced an image audiences immediately understood. During World War II, Lake even participated in publicity, encouraging women working around machinery to adopt safer hairstyles because imitation of her loose hair could become dangerous in factories. Imagine possessing a hairstyle influential enough to require a safety campaign. Her career later declined sharply, and her life became considerably more difficult than the polished Paramount photographs suggested. Yet the image survived. One partially covered eye was enough to turn Veronica Lake into one of the most instantly recognizable silhouettes in Hollywood history. Number 25. Rhonda Fleming. Technicolor loved Rhonda Fleming. Her striking red hair, complexion, and elegant wardrobe photographed so effectively in color that publicity sometimes nicknamed her the Queen of Technicolor. That label tells us almost everything about how Hollywood initially positioned her. Fleming appeared in westerns, adventure films, musicals, and film noir, often bringing a highly polished glamour that stood out even in elaborate studio productions. Spellbound gave her an early opportunity under Alfred Hitchcock, though her part was small. More substantial roles arrived in films such as Out of the Past, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Gunfight at the OK Corral, and Slightly Scarlet. The last of those is particularly interesting because color cinematography becomes almost aggressively expressive, with Fleming and Arlene Dahl photographed in rich, heightened tones that feel halfway between film noir and a glossy magazine illustration. Fleming could also sing, something not always remembered when discussion concentrates on her photographs. Like many women on this countdown, she demonstrates the strange imbalance of studio-era publicity. A performer might possess acting ability, musical skill, discipline, and years of professional experience, yet promotional copy could reduce everything to hair color and appearance. The nickname worked because the camera genuinely did love Rhonda Fleming, but she remained on-screen for decades because there was considerably more than Technicolor beauty keeping her there. Number 26. Arlene Dahl. Red hair became an entire promotional category in classical Hollywood, and Arlene Dahl was one of the women's studios photographed most spectacularly. MGM understood how to use saturated color, fashionable gowns, and carefully designed portraits to distinguish performers in magazines and lobby displays. Dahl's image fit that machine perfectly, yet her career moved beyond conventional leading lady assignments. She appeared in musicals, adventure pictures, crime films, and later the wonderfully imaginative Journey to the Center of the Earth. That 1959 adventure remains particularly enjoyable because its strange underground landscapes, giant creatures, colorful sets, and Jules Verne fantasy gave Dahl something more unusual than the standard romantic melodrama. Away from movies, she became increasingly involved in beauty writing, fashion, and business. That second career makes sense, because Dahl had spent years inside an industry where appearance was treated almost like engineering. Studios controlled lighting, makeup, hair, wardrobe, photography, posture, and even supposedly spontaneous publicity photographs. Few people understood that machinery better than actresses who lived inside it. Dahl eventually transformed some of that experience into work outside acting. Her place on this countdown therefore represents more than a glamorous silhouette. She belonged to the generation that watched Hollywood turn beauty into an industrial product, and then learned how to turn knowledge of that system into opportunities of her own. Number 27. Janet Leigh. Modern viewers frequently remember Janet Leigh for One Motel Shower, which is almost unfair considering how varied her career had already been. Before Alfred Hitchcock changed horror history with Psycho, Leigh had spent years as one of Hollywood's most appealing leading ladies. She appeared in comedies, musicals, adventure pictures, dramas, and films noir, often projecting a polished but accessible glamour. In The Naked Spur, she worked effectively inside a rough Western environment. Touch of Evil placed her within Orson Welles' feverish border town nightmare. Then Psycho arrived. Hitchcock deliberately used Leigh's established star image to manipulate audiences. Marion Crane initially appears to be the central character, and viewers naturally assume that a famous actress will remain at the center of the movie. Then the shower sequence destroys that assumption. The scene became so culturally dominant that it can overshadow Lee's earlier work, but it also demonstrates why casting her mattered. Audiences recognized her. They trusted the conventions surrounding a glamorous female star. Hitchcock used those expectations against them. Lee later continued working across film and television, demonstrating far greater longevity than one sequence might suggest. Her presence on this list is therefore not about one famous photograph. It is about how conventional Hollywood glamour became a weapon in one of cinema's most famous acts of misdirection. Number 28. Jean Peters. Howard Hughes famously surrounded himself with glamorous actresses, but Jean Peters never seemed completely comfortable with the exaggerated publicity games associated with his Hollywood empire. That reluctance helped distinguish her. 20th Century Fox cast Peters in historical adventures, westerns, dramas, and films noir, often photographing her with classic studio elegance. Yet she frequently played characters with more toughness than the average decorative leading lady. Pickup on South Street is probably the best example. Samuel Fuller's gritty crime film gives Peters a role far removed from polite drawing room glamour. As Candy, she becomes entangled with pickpockets, criminals, police officers, and stolen government information. The movie feels sweaty, dangerous, and physical. Peters fits that world because she brings directness rather than fragile refinement. She also appeared in Niagara, though Marilyn Monroe's sensational star-making image understandably dominates modern discussion of that film. That contrast is fascinating. Monroe embraced, or at least performed, the heightened bombshell identity Hollywood wanted. Peters remained much more resistant to becoming that kind of publicity creation. She later married Howard Hughes, and largely withdrew from acting during a period when his own mysterious public profile grew increasingly strange. Jean Peters therefore represents the star who possessed every visual quality required for aggressive glamour marketing, but never seemed interested in letting that become her entire identity. Number 29. Gloria Graham. A conventional smile was never really Gloria Graham's greatest weapon. What made her fascinating was uncertainty. Film noir directors recognized that immediately. Graham could appear vulnerable, flirtatious, wounded, cynical, or dangerous, sometimes inside the same conversation. Her distinctive look and unusual delivery helped turn supporting and leading roles into unforgettable appearances. In A Lonely Place, opposite Humphrey Bogart, she gives one of her finest performances. The film begins as a murder mystery, but gradually becomes something sadder and more psychologically complicated. Graham's Laurel Gray falls for Bogart's troubled screenwriter Dixon Steele, yet affection slowly collides with fear. Her glamour never disappears, but the movie refuses to treat it as protection. The Big Heat contains an even more famous example. As Debbie Marsh, Graham initially appears to be another gangster's fashionable companion. Events brutally overturn that assumption, and her character acquires unexpected courage. She won an Academy Award for The Bad and the Beautiful, demonstrating how effectively she could dominate scenes even with limited screen time. Hollywood publicity could certainly photograph Graham as another glamorous actress. The films did something better. They allowed her beauty to coexist with nervousness, wit, moral ambiguity, and emotional danger. That complexity is why Gloria Graham remains one of film noir's most difficult women to forget. Number 30. Virginia Mayo. Bright Technicolor musicals made Virginia Mayo look completely at home inside Hollywood fantasy. Then darker films revealed that she could do much more. During the 1940s, Mayo became a popular performer in comedies and musicals, frequently appearing opposite Danny Kaye. Her blonde glamour and energetic screen presence fit the colorful Warner Brothers entertainment machine beautifully. But the best years of our lives provided a completely different challenge. William Wyler's post-war drama follows returning servicemen struggling to rebuild ordinary lives. Mayo plays Marie, whose expectations clash painfully with the changed man her husband has become. The role allowed her to be unsympathetic without becoming a cartoon. Then White Heat placed her opposite James Cagney's terrifying Cody Jarrett. As Verna, Mayo operates within a violent criminal world where loyalty changes according to survival. These performances are important because they demonstrate how misleading publicity images could become. Magazine photographs might present Mayo as another cheerful blonde beauty. Her strongest movies show someone capable of playing selfishness, calculation, frustration, and fear. She also worked steadily in westerns and adventure pictures as the studio era evolved. Virginia Mayo may not possess the instant 21st century name recognition of Monroe or Taylor, but during her peak years, she was unmistakably part of Hollywood's glamour establishment, and frequently more versatile than the marketing suggested. Number 31. Deborah Paget. Historical epics loved performers who could look convincing inside costumes no ordinary person would ever wear to breakfast. Deborah Paget became one of the actresses most strongly associated with that type of spectacle. 20th Century Fox introduced her while she was still young, and before long she appeared in westerns, biblical epics, adventure films, and exotic historical settings. Her role in The Ten Commandments placed her inside Cecil B. DeMille's enormous production machine, surrounded by monumental sets, elaborate costumes, and thousands of extras. Yet one of Paget's most discussed appearances came outside Hollywood in Fritz Lang's Indian epic films, where an elaborate dance sequence became famous internationally. That sequence contributed strongly to her exotic screen image, even though such Hollywood and European portrayals frequently reflected cultural fantasies more than historical reality. This is where examining glamour becomes interesting. Wardrobe departments could create an identity audiences accepted instantly, even when it had little relationship to the actress's own background. Paget repeatedly found herself inside those manufactured worlds. She also appeared opposite Elvis Presley in Love Me Tender, giving her another connection to changing popular culture during the 1950s. Her film career was comparatively brief, and she eventually stepped away from the screen. But during Hollywood's age of biblical adventures and historical spectacle, Deborah Paget represented exactly the kind of glamorous presence studios believed could make oversized fantasy feel even bigger. Number 32. Mara Corday. Monsters, giant creatures, Western gunfighters, and glamorous actresses formed a surprisingly reliable combination during 1950s genre cinema. Mara Corday understood that world well. After working as a model and showgirl, she entered movies and appeared in westerns, crime pictures, and science fiction films. Modern cult film audiences probably know her best from Tarantula, the classic creature feature involving a laboratory experiment and an enormous spider terrorizing the desert. The production contains exactly the ingredients audiences expect from 1950s science fiction: isolated laboratories, dangerous scientific ambition, practical effects, desert landscapes, and ordinary people confronting something gigantic. Corday's presence brought familiar Hollywood glamour to that bizarre setting. She also appeared in The Black Scorpion and other genre productions, creating an association with the period's monster boom. What makes actresses such as Corday important is that old Hollywood history often concentrates only on prestige pictures and Academy Award winners. Yet drive-ins and neighborhood theaters were packed with cheaper productions that developed passionate audiences of their own. Publicity photography frequently emphasized the glamorous female cast members as strongly as the monsters. That marketing formula could be obvious, but it worked. Corday later returned to acting in smaller roles, including appearances connected with longtime friend Clint Eastwood. For fans of 1950s genre filmmaking, her combination of Western toughness and monster movie glamour remains instantly recognizable. Number 33. Joy Lansing. Some performers became famous through one enormous role. Joy Lansing became recognizable through accumulation. Film appearances, television guest spots, nightclub work, publicity photographs, and musical performances gradually created a familiar Hollywood image, even when she was not receiving top billing. Her platinum blonde appearance fitted perfectly into the 1950s glamour culture that also produced Monroe, Mansfield, and Van Doren. That resemblance could be useful for publicity, but dangerous professionally. Hollywood already possessed several established blonde stars, meaning actresses working inside the same visual category competed for limited opportunities. Lansing nevertheless appeared across an extraordinary range of entertainment. Viewers saw her in films, television comedies, crime shows, westerns, and music-oriented projects. One of her better-known television roles came as Shirley Swanson on The Bob Cummings Show, while later appearances helped keep her visible throughout the 1960s. Her glamorous persona was frequently the immediate reason characters noticed her, a familiar limitation for actresses of the period. Yet Lansing possessed enough comic confidence to make many of those appearances entertaining. Her career also illustrates how television altered Hollywood celebrity. By the late 1950s, a performer no longer required continuous major film roles to remain familiar to millions of viewers. Joy Lansing moved between formats at exactly that moment, becoming one of the era's recognizable glamour personalities, without ever needing one single movie to define her. Number 34. Cleo Moore. Not every blonde promoted as the next Marilyn Monroe had a realistic chance of becoming Marilyn Monroe. Cleo Moore's career demonstrates how aggressively studios chased successful formulas during the 1950s. Columbia Pictures presented Moore as a glamorous blonde personality at precisely the moment Monroe's fame was exploding. Publicity photographs emphasized similarities, but Moore's filmography moved more heavily toward crime dramas and low-budget exploitation pictures. Movies such as One Girl's Confession, Women's Prison, and Overexposed gave her opportunities to play women navigating morally complicated or sensational environments. The titles alone reveal what producers believed would attract audiences. Overexposed is particularly interesting because Moore plays an ambitious photographer whose career moves through nightclub and newspaper culture. The story allowed her more agency than the simple decorative roles associated with blonde star publicity, yet the shadow of larger celebrities remained difficult to escape. Hollywood has always loved declaring someone the next established star because comparison creates immediate headlines. Unfortunately, that marketing can erase whatever makes the newer performer distinctive. Moore eventually left acting, and her name became more closely associated with cult film enthusiasts than mainstream classical Hollywood histories. That makes her worth rediscovering. Behind the publicity photographs was a performer attempting to create an identity inside an industry that kept comparing her with the most famous blonde woman in the world. Number 35. Cherie North. When studios started searching for another Marilyn Monroe, Cherie North became one of the performers caught inside that strange competition. 20th Century Fox recognized her dancing talent, blonde appearance, and strong screen presence, and began positioning her as a possible new glamour star during Monroe's increasingly difficult relationship with the studio. That situation could hardly have been easy. North had genuine musical ability. Films including How to Be Very, Very Popular and The Best Things in Life Are Free gave her opportunities to dance and perform with the energetic style that had helped establish her career. But publicity inevitably encouraged comparison with Monroe. The problem with that strategy is obvious in retrospect. Audiences rarely want a replacement when the original remains culturally dominant. North's career became far more interesting once she moved beyond that expectation. She developed into a strong character actress, appearing in films and television for decades. Later audiences could find her in everything from serious dramas to popular television series. That longevity completely changed the meaning of her career. Instead of becoming another cautionary story about a glamour actress disappearing when fashions changed, North demonstrated remarkable adaptability. The studio may initially have looked at her and seen a possible substitute for another celebrity. Cherie North eventually proved that survival in Hollywood often depends on refusing to remain whatever producers first imagined you were supposed to be. Number 36. Barbara Nichols. A high-pitched voice, platinum hair, and exaggerated glamour made Barbara Nichols instantly noticeable, even when she entered a movie for only a few scenes. Hollywood frequently cast her as nightclub women, flashy girlfriends, showgirls, or comic blondes. On paper, those roles could have become repetitive stereotypes. Nichols made them memorable through timing. She understood how to make exaggerated femininity funny, without acting as though the character herself were necessarily stupid. That difference matters. In Sweet Smell of Success, a film packed with cynical journalists, publicists, entertainers, and damaged relationships, Nichols fits perfectly into the toxic nightlife atmosphere. She also appeared in Pal Joey, The King and Four Queens, and numerous television programs. Her characters frequently looked as though they had spent enormous effort preparing to enter the room, only to discover that the men around them were even more ridiculous than expected. That comic self-awareness helped Nichols stand apart from other actresses given similar assignments. Old Hollywood relied heavily on recognizable types. The audience needed to understand a supporting character immediately, especially in fast-moving comedies. A distinctive hairstyle, costume, voice, and posture could perform half the introduction. Nichols mastered that language. She may not have received the prestige roles of the women near the top of this ranking, but she could enter a crowded scene and ensure that viewers immediately noticed exactly where Barbara Nichols was standing. Number 37. Marilyn Maxwell. Sharing a first name with Monroe could create confusion today, but Marilyn Maxwell developed her own Hollywood career before Monroe had become the ultimate Marilyn. Maxwell worked as an actress, singer, entertainer, and frequent performer alongside Bob Hope. Her screen image combined polished glamour with the easy confidence required for comedy and live entertainment. Films including Champion, Summer Holiday, and The Lemon Drop Kid demonstrate different parts of her career, though appearances with Hope became especially important to her public identity. Performing comedy beside a dominant personality requires precise timing. A glamorous actress who simply stands there becomes scenery. Maxwell could participate in the rhythm of the joke. That ability also made her effective entertaining military audiences during Hope's overseas tours. The experience reveals another side of Hollywood glamour culture. Publicity photographs were carefully staged, but performers such as Maxwell also needed to succeed in front of live audiences, where editors, retakes, and controlled lighting could not rescue a weak performance. Her career never produced one giant iconic image comparable with Monroe's white dress or Hayworth's black gown. Instead, Maxwell developed the kind of professional durability that kept entertainers working across movies, radio, television, and personal appearances. She belongs here because classic Hollywood was supported not only by legendary superstars, but by highly skilled performers who could turn glamour into an actual working profession. Number 38. Elaine Stewart. MGM knew how to photograph new actresses as though they had already been famous for years. Elaine Stewart received exactly that treatment during the 1950s. After modeling, she entered movies and quickly appeared in major productions, including The Bad and the Beautiful, Brigadoon, and The Adventures of Haji Baba. The latter offered the sort of colorful adventure setting Hollywood loved during the period: exoticized landscapes, elaborate costumes, romance, and fantasy. Stewart's glamorous appearance made her a natural choice for promotional photography, and magazines reinforced that image. Yet her career illustrates how unpredictable stardom could be. Possessing beauty, studio backing, publicity, and appearances in expensive films still did not guarantee that an actress would become the next Elizabeth Taylor. Hollywood introduced new faces constantly. Each season brought another performer advertised as a major discovery. Only a handful became permanent cultural icons. Stewart continued appearing in entertainment and later became familiar to television audiences through game shows, including appearances connected with her husband, producer Merrill Heder. That transition from MGM glamour to television demonstrates how performers adapted when the classical studio machine disappeared. Today, her film career is often discovered through viewers exploring 1950s cinema rather than through a single universally famous role. But surviving portraits reveal exactly why studios were interested. Elaine Stewart looked completely natural inside the polished visual language MGM had spent decades perfecting. Number 39. Marie McDonald. A nickname can become a career asset and a trap. Marie McDonald was famously promoted as the Body, a label that demonstrates with almost uncomfortable clarity how Hollywood publicity departments sometimes reduced actresses to one marketable characteristic. It certainly attracted attention. McDonald appeared in movies throughout the 1940s and 1950s, including musicals, comedies, and crime-related pictures. But her celebrity often exceeded the importance of her film roles. Nightclub appearances, romances, marriages, publicity stories, and dramatic newspaper coverage turned her into the kind of personality whose private life became entertainment. That phenomenon did not begin with social media. Hollywood gossip columns could transform personal events into ongoing serialized drama long before television celebrity culture became dominant. McDonald's nickname intensified that process because journalists already possessed an easy headline whenever she appeared. The unfortunate consequence was that public fascination with the persona often overshadowed the performer. Her life also contained considerable turmoil, and she died young in 1965. Looking back, McDonald's career offers a particularly useful example of why a countdown like this cannot reasonably be based on supposedly exact physical measurements. Studio publicity existed to attract attention, not to conduct scientific documentation. What can be assessed is the image Hollywood sold. In McDonald's case, the industry practically announced its strategy in 2 words: the Body. Few stars were branded more directly. Number 40. Carol Landis. During the early 1940s, Carol Landis seemed positioned for substantial stardom. She was striking, energetic, photogenic, and particularly popular with servicemen during World War II. Publicity photography strongly emphasized glamour, but Landis also worked relentlessly entertaining troops. Her overseas tours exposed her to difficult conditions far removed from Hollywood studios. That aspect of her life deserves more attention, because it complicates the simplistic image created by pin-up photographs. Landis appeared in films including 1 Million BC, Topper Returns, Moon over Miami, and Four Jills in a Jeep. The last picture drew directly on wartime entertainment experiences and helped connect her public image with service to troops abroad. Yet her Hollywood career became increasingly unstable. Professional disappointments and complicated personal relationships contributed to a life that was far less carefree than promotional photographs implied. Landis died in 1948, at only 29. Her early death meant she never had the opportunity to reshape her reputation, as many longer-lived stars eventually did. That leaves a fascinating contrast. On surviving posters and publicity stills, she remains permanently young, smiling, glamorous, and confident. Behind those images was a hard-working performer navigating a demanding industry during wartime. Carol Landis reminds us that the most cheerful Hollywood photographs can conceal stories considerably more complicated than the studio intended audiences to see. Number 41. Terry Moore. A film involving a giant gorilla is not the most obvious place to look for traditional Hollywood glamour, but Terry Moore's career included exactly that combination. She had already worked in films as a young performer, before gaining greater recognition in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Her performance in Comeback, Little Sheba earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, demonstrating serious dramatic potential. Then came Mighty Joe Young and other popular productions that connected her with adventure and spectacle. Moore's youthful appearance and carefully styled publicity photography made her a familiar magazine personality during an era obsessed with glamorous young actresses. But her story became even more famous because of her complicated claimed relationship with billionaire Howard Hughes. Decades later, arguments over whether she and Hughes had been legally married generated extensive public discussion. That controversy became so prominent that it sometimes overshadowed the films themselves. Yet Moore continued acting for an extraordinarily long period, appearing across film and television rather than remaining frozen in one decade. That endurance separates her from many stars marketed through youthful glamour. Hollywood's publicity machine constantly looked for the newest sensation because newness sold magazines. Remaining professionally active after that machinery moved on required something else entirely. Terry Moore proved remarkably difficult to reduce to a single photograph, relationship, or period of her life. Number 42. Anne Francis. Science fiction fans may immediately picture Anne Francis standing inside the extraordinary futuristic world of Forbidden Planet. Released in 1956, the film combined advanced visual effects, electronic music, futuristic design, Shakespearean inspiration, and Robbie the Robot into one of the decade's most influential science fiction productions. Francis played Altaira, the daughter of Dr. Morbius, and her costumes immediately became part of the movie's visual identity. From a modern perspective, some of the characters' presentation clearly reflects 1950s attitudes about women and male attention, but Francis herself brought intelligence and confidence that helped keep Altaira from becoming merely another piece of futuristic scenery. Her career became even more interesting with television. As the star of Honey West, she played a stylish private investigator at a time when female-led action and detective series remained unusual. Honey was fashionable, capable, and independent, giving Francis a screen identity different from the sheltered young woman of Forbidden Planet. That contrast explains her importance. Hollywood could initially position an actress through glamorous photographs, but television sometimes offered opportunities to reshape that image. Francis successfully moved between science fiction, crime drama, comedy, and guest appearances for decades. For classic genre fans, she remains proof that futuristic costumes and blonde glamour may attract attention. But a strong screen personality is what survives after the special effects stop looking new. Number 43. Piper Laurie. Nothing about Piper Laurie's later career suggests she should be remembered merely as another glamorous studio discovery. That is precisely what makes her early Hollywood period so interesting. Universal signed Laurie when she was young and promoted her heavily through the familiar mechanisms of the era: fashionable photographs, colorful costumes, romantic publicity, and interviews designed to create a marketable personality. Some promotional stories were so deliberately manufactured that Laurie later discussed the absurdity of the studio publicity machine. She appeared opposite stars such as Tony Curtis and Rock Hudson in glossy entertainment that emphasized youth and beauty. Then she stepped away from Hollywood. When Laurie returned to serious acting, the transformation was remarkable. The Hustler gave her the emotionally difficult role of Sarah Packard opposite Paul Newman. The performance earned an Academy Award nomination and effectively demolished the idea that she belonged only in lightweight studio vehicles. Years later, Carey introduced her to another generation as the terrifyingly intense Margaret White. Then Twin Peaks demonstrated yet another side of her talent. The glamorous ingenue had become one of America's most distinctive character actresses. Laurie's career may be the perfect argument against judging studio-era women by photographs. A publicity department once tried to sell Piper Laurie as a beautiful young commodity. She spent the rest of her professional life proving how dramatically incomplete that description had been. Number 44. Julie Newmar. One television costume transformed Julie Newmar into a permanent pop culture icon. Before Batman, however, Newmar already had an unusual career encompassing dance, film, Broadway, and television. Her height and dancer's physique made her visually distinctive from the beginning. She appeared in productions such as Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and later won a Tony Award for her stage work. Then she became Catwoman. The 1960s Batman television series treated comic book storytelling with bright colors, exaggerated performances, playful dialogue, and deliberately theatrical action. Newmar understood the tone perfectly. Her Catwoman moved with feline precision, spoke with amused confidence, and constantly seemed to be enjoying herself more than Batman was. The fitted costume became famous, but the performance made it work. Without Newmar's voice, posture, timing, and physical comedy, the outfit would simply have been wardrobe. She turned it into a character. That distinction matters when examining Hollywood glamour. Clothing can emphasize an image, but charisma determines whether audiences remember it decades later. Newmar subsequently appeared across numerous television series and maintained a distinctive public personality far beyond the original program. Even with several talented actresses eventually playing Catwoman, her interpretation remained a fan favorite. Classic Hollywood and early television produced countless glamorous costumes. Julie Newmar created the rare case where audiences can recognize the character from a silhouette before they even see her face. Number 45. Diana Dors. Britain had its own answer to Hollywood's blonde bombshell phenomenon, and Diana Dors became one of its most famous examples. British publicity frequently promoted her through comparisons with Marilyn Monroe, using blonde hair, glamorous gowns, luxury cars, and sensational headlines to construct a larger-than-life celebrity persona. Yet Dors could act far beyond that stereotype. Pictures such as Yield to the Night demonstrated serious dramatic ability. The film stripped away much of the playful glamour surrounding her public image and placed her inside a bleak story with emotional weight. That contrast surprised audiences who knew mainly the newspaper version of Diana Dors. Her career also showed how celebrity culture operated across the Atlantic. Lavish parties, expensive possessions, relationships, and tabloid stories could create enormous fame even when individual movie roles were less internationally visible. As Dors grew older, she adapted. Television appearances, character roles, comedy, and candid discussion of her earlier image allowed her to survive beyond the youthful persona publicity departments had constructed. That makes her an appropriate final entry. The actresses throughout this ranking came from different countries, decades, genres, and body types. What connected them was not an objective measurement. It was Hollywood's extraordinary ability to take costume, photography, personality, fashion, and publicity, and turn a human being into a recognizable silhouette millions of people believed they knew. Old Hollywood sold glamour like no industry before it, but these 45 women proved the photographs never told the complete story. Behind the gowns, poses, posters, and carefully controlled publicity were comedians, dancers, dramatic actresses, athletes, businesswomen, and survivors. Which star do you think defined classic Hollywood glamour better than anyone else? Tell us below, and if you enjoyed the countdown, like the video and subscribe for more forgotten Hollywood stories.